I would like to give the floor now to our audience. Please feel free to ask questions. Ambassador Ramdin will be taking your questions and moderating the discussion coming up.
Thank you for it. We have nowadays in Brazil a serious discussion about racial quotas to access to universities. People who defended this policy normally thought that's a historical reparation, and scholars that are against this policy said that we are creating a racial society. What's your opinion about that?
And it's a challenge because you've got two conflicting moral imperatives. The need to try and correct historical inequality of access and participation against the right of young people to have that equal access. We debated this for a long time. I can only speak about New Zealand in this instance, and in the end we agreed that we would see, because we had to get more kids into university. So we gave more advantage in getting in, but we didn't allow them, they still had to pass. So in other words, we lowered the barrier and said this is now a clear objective, and it was both a finance issue but also a qualification, access to the seats and places available. And we were prepared to identify basically a quota. It wasn't called a quota, but we set a set of goals of how many young Maori people we wanted participating in certain areas, and then we gave them some financial support to get there. And it certainly helped get the participation rates, and we've been able to phase it down to what is now much more of a normal societal area. The only areas that we now do it is if we find, for example, in midwives, we found that a lot of women were saying, I want a Maori midwife, and in the case of Pacific people, they want a Pacific Island midwife, because there are some cultural nuances that at the birth stage that they like that to be respected, and so we just simply didn't have enough. So we then went and said we're going to fund a particular set of places in order to get that correction if the professional development required. Yes, it's contentious, but if it's seen as a transitional measure and an equity correction measure, I think it can be argued and sustained.
Permítame en primer lugar felicitarle por su estupenda ponencia sobre un tema transversal como el de la cohesión social y participación. Usted ha perfilado varios de los elementos y las condiciones necesarias para propender hacia sociedades más inclusivas y participativas. Y ha destacado en este ámbito como uno de los aspectos más importantes tanto el liderazgo intelectual como el liderazgo en la acción. Mi pregunta es si estos liderazgos se perciben lo suficientemente fuertes en América Latina para propender hacia sociedades más participativas y más cohesionadas.
Look, it's a difficult issue when you've got a gap between where you are and where you want to be, to try and work it out. And even at the beginning stages, when we were working to try and bring the Maori population up in every area, the critics said, they'll make mistakes. Some of their businesses will fail, or some of the administration will fail, and it was difficult politically because that was true. But frankly, we had to take the risk of not doing it was greater than the risk of doing it. And I think that's where political courage lies. If you understand that you have to achieve the change, then you've got to say to people will make mistakes. But actually the end point that we're aiming for, we're capacity building. And so we have to take our people on this journey. There's one other thing I'd like to say. It's interesting that in developing economies, this is often an observation, and I think it's very real, but there are still enormous strengths in these societies, and often you've got historic cultural institutions that it's worth mapping those. I often use the phrase, starting off culturally, doing a cultural mapping exercise of who you are, rather than focusing on the end point where you want to be immediately. Say, well, what are the strong institutions? It might be the church. It might be your education system. It may be some other element of culture, it may be groupings of families or the ways in which your society is structured, and then ask the question, are they potential delivery agents? If it's in the health service delivery area to enable the community or improve community health status, for example. The concept of cultural mapping is actually a cathartic process as well. It allows people to suddenly appreciate the broad sense of diversity. You know, who are we? Where did we come from? What are our historically significant dates? What have we got to celebrate? What have we got that we would like to rethink, and you know, lay it all out in front of you, and often you'll find great sense of strength, which you then can make these places in which your people can be standing tall, from which they can move forward, rather than start from a sense of loss and that you are an undeveloped society. Many of your societies are extremely sophisticated and have thousands of years of development. I often think it's a mistake not to acknowledge that and start as a point of strength as to why they are so deeply rooted and successful. And you often then can reconcile the indigenous against the new populations as well. By the way, tourism is such an enormously important future feature. The curiosity of societies to understand more about each other's societies is very real. And with global mobility, you know, this is going to increase, not decrease. And celebrating that which is obvious within your societies, that the cultural mapping strategy is a worthwhile idea in that respect as well. Because often right under your nose, there are opportunities for economic hubs of activity. And they might often be leveraging off whether it's monuments or practices and so on. And again, as you do that and create economic activity, you often then create new opportunity for microfinance. And as you bring in microfinance ideas, entrepreneurship emerges. And as entrepreneurship emerges, you know, the base of the economy broadens. And so you can get this virtuous circle to begin. So don't be afraid that it's not a fully developed, sophisticated society. Start at a base that's comfortable for your place and then work it up.
Thank you very much from the practice of your knowledge and experience. We have two questions from the front row. Maybe I should be equitable and inclusive and ask those in the back to ask some questions, if there are. Good.
Hi there, my name is Francia Rabago, I'm from Mexico. First of all, I'd like to thank you for giving us this great opportunity to listen to this great project. I would like to ask you, could you kindly name the most successful cases or the most important ongoing projects where the Club of Madrid has helped societies to be, societies or countries to be more cohesive or inclusive? Thank you.
Let me give you two that I've been involved in to illustrate the sorts of things we do. Recently I've been to Yemen. It's a challenging country. And the invitation to the Club of Madrid was to work with, at the invitation of the President effectively, because he believes that gender is an issue that is significant for Yemeni society. There's only one woman in the Yemeni parliament out of 420, or I forget the number, forgive me, but it's a huge gap. And so he has facilitated the bringing in of people like myself, and we worked for 2 days with a group of women who most certainly had the potential to be parliamentarians in the future. And we spent time literally talking and listening and sharing strategies of what has worked, both in my own experience and working with them as to how they could deal with the mosque and other very real complexity in their own societies. And they then were strategizing amongst themselves as to how they might progress. So in some instances, the Club of Madrid, if we're invited to go right in at that practice level, we will choose amongst our leader group people who've got the ability to work in those settings. So that's one type of illustration. The second sort of work, and that was, time will tell whether it's successful. We don't measure our success in, you know, we solved this problem or pieces broken out here. What we want to do is enable those who are currently leading to make the right decisions and make the difference.